What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Non-Standard Podcast. I'm your host, Manny Lamson, and I just want to say thank you for listening to really any episode. It's been an amazing journey so far, and we're just getting started. On this episode today, I'm joined with my buddy Will. We met through TACPO Assessment course in March of 2024. He is a current pararescueman in the Air Force. He was selected to move on as an officer in TACP, so he's about to get ready to go to OTS and then go to the schoolhouse. But what I love about this episode is his mentality to want to keep learning, and what we discussed, which I've heard in other episodes, is the failure. It's hard to say. It's hard to talk about. But he talked about an early career point in his life where he failed. I talk about failing the TACPO assessment, and it's just an amazing episode where we learn and get to know each other and build relationships. So I hope you like it. With that being said, if you love any episodes or want to share them or save them or follow, you know what to do. It's pretty simple nowadays. Just go out there and hit the follow button on Spotify. Subscribe on YouTube, share on Instagram. I'm always here. Reach out to me. The best way is just going to be through Instagram, Manny Mustache. All right, let's get this episode rolling. Thank you. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Non-Standard Podcast. I'm your host, Manny, and I got Will with me today, just like you heard in the intro. And I'm excited for this on a couple reasons. One, it's been a couple weeks since I've been able to record with move-in and stuff like this. Two, Will's a badass. He's probably going to be super humble about it because I got to grind with him for 5 days straight, 24 hours a day when we went through TACPO selection. So we'll talk about some of that as we get going here. But we're just going to get right into it. So Will, just like we talked about before, we'll get into the 3 H's, you know. And I love starting with the 3 H's because it helps people who are new figure out who you are, gets the juices going, and it's just a different way to start a podcast. So hometown, heroes, and some hardships. And then we'll dive into sort of your career and then get into the leadership stuff.
All right. So, yeah, man, again, I appreciate you having me on. Will Malone, hometown, grew up military kid. So for the longest time, that was always my call right there, is it's really hard to claim anywhere as home. Moved around, I think, in 5 different places over the course of my youth before I enlisted. But if I had to pick one, I'll claim Yorktown, Virginia. That's because that's where I went to high school and junior high as well. And so, you know, those are the years when you're like, all right, starting to figure out what my talents are, figure out what my interests are as well, and how I can incorporate those and be a significant contributor to, if not my community, then hopefully the world. And so, yeah, Yorktown, love that place. A lot of history there. Big history fan of myself, actually. So, you know, with the Civil War, obviously the American Revolution, a lot of that stuff, opportunities to immerse yourself in what those battlefields looked like, what those guys had to go through as well. You're like, dang, dude, like this is a pretty awesome place to grow up. And so I was definitely blessed for that opportunity.
I visited over in South Carolina for my last deployment, and it was really cool just driving up to like Charlotte and Charleston and seeing like the signs for all the battlefields and stuff. And just growing up on the West Coast, I didn't see a lot of that. Texas, I haven't seen a lot of it. So driving over there is like, it's just humbling, man, to drive around and to be like, man, like this, you know, like it's where so much history happened. It was pretty cool. It's one of those things I think a lot of people overlook, just how cool it is just to travel through those areas, and you don't have to go far to find something new or learn something about the history of the United States, how that all came about.
Mm-hmm. It's the funny thing is, I remember distinctly, I was 13 years old, and we were there for the Independence Day parade, and so a big event, obviously, for that area. And I go, yeah, this is pretty cool, Dad. We're literally here. This is where the surrender happened. And my dad goes, like, you think that's pretty cool? Just down the road, that's where General Cornwallis surrendered to Washington. We're like, we gotta go there. It's a pretty modest little building, but at the same time, we're like, this right here was the birth of our great nation. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of people in Boston and Philadelphia that'll argue and say, no, it started here, but no, Yorktown, that's the birth of the U.S. right there.
Nice. Who are those heroes you got?
2 heroes. Number 1 will always be my dad. That guy had a tremendous impact on my life. There's nobody even comes close. That's the guy who, you know, taught you right from wrong. That's the guy that taught you that you have purpose, and your life is to find that purpose, to commit yourself to that purpose. And he taught me drive, and he showed me what it meant to work hard. You saw that guy get after it every day. My dad was a I was actually a fighter pilot by trade, flew the F-15 Strike Eagle, and he was there for pretty much all of anything after 2001 and on. And so he was a busy guy at the time. It was tough to see him have to leave home, but as you get older, you start to realize that, hey, this was for a significant purpose. So I'm proud to be his son for that case. And then I'll say the second hero. This one was tough. Sports guy growing up, and so a lot of professional athletes were my big heroes there. And out of all the ones I had to choose from, between like your Kobe Bryants and your Michael Jordans, I chose Ray Lewis. Ray Lewis, if you're not familiar, was a professional football player defensively, and that guy, his leadership, his passion, his just raw intensity for the game of football, it was contagious. And I used to watch all kinds of highlights of him playing. I used to watch the speeches that he would give his team before and after. And other than his intensity and his tremendous talent, everybody always commented how strong his leadership was and how that had a huge impact for the Baltimore Ravens, which equated to 2 championships over the course of his career. And that's no small feat, especially at the professional level. So I'd have to say those 2 guys are my heroes.
Yeah, I think for it's crazy to hear us have to explain who Ray Lewis is for people listening, because they may not have seen, like, we're in that generation now where, like, I sometimes talk to somebody about an athlete and they're like, who's that? I'm like, whoa. How do you not know who that is? But if they're like 20 or below, maybe, probably around 20 or below, and I grew up watching Ray Lewis as well. Being a Patriots fan, he was always a adversary of mine, because the Baltimore was always super tough to play. One word you said I loved: contagious. Dude, that is such a huge word in leadership, because some people can be like loud and obnoxious, loud, and people are just like, oh, they're there, But the word contagious is a little different with some of the ways we lead. And I think that's a key word that some people don't consider when they're trying to lead is, yes, you can do all the hype, you can be the hype man, and do all that. But if it's not spreading to other people or not motivating the other people around you, it's not doing anything. And so when you said contagious, I wrote it down and I was like, man, that's a good word. And that might be something we talk about on like, how do I spread that contagion, like, how do I be contagious? Instead of just like telling people what to do with a loud voice or hand figures, like that might be something we come back on a little later on that word contagious. But and that's what I saw in him too, man. Like, super hard worker, but man, that defense around him, dude, I got goosebumps right now just thinking about how they played, man. Like, it was insane.
No, he was definitely the head of that snake. That was I was sad when he retired, but I'd rather see a guy like that go out at the top than watch them wither away. It's like the that song by Def Leppard, what was it, Rock of Ages? Like, it's better to burn out than fade away. Yeah, man, I'd rather see a guy go out while he still might have a little bit left, as opposed to just watching them like, oh God, man, that was my hero. Now look at him. We've seen that plenty of times, but I was grateful for that. Then the hardship. This one, very easy. It was my first induct team, 2016. 1602. Never forget it. Just all around failure, to tell you the truth. Failure in character, which was the tough part. Failure in performance, obviously, because I was a setback for that one. But when I think about how that course went, I made it all the way to the final evaluation of the final day, and then I failed at the very last event. You have the course itself is 11 weeks long, and then between the of that last week of the 11 weeks, you have 9 total evaluations. That's your typical, your calisthenics, your push-ups, your pull-ups, your sit-ups. You go for a run, and then you do your fin, and then you have your WaterCon events, which I think there's about 5 or 6 events in there. Got through all of that, all the way to the very last event of the WaterCon session of the very last day, and tripped at the finish line. And I didn't trip because, well, there was a performance failure, obviously, but at the same time, I tried to cheat it. That was the issue. Was I thought I'd found a loophole in how to properly accomplish that, and truly immature. Like, that's just pure immaturity right there, trying to shortcut the system. Like, no, dude, like, do what you have practiced up to this point. Don't try to make it easier for yourself. Just do what you know to be right. Do what you know the instructors want to see, and then get it done. But no, I failed there. And then even after I'd failed that event, afterwards, it was like, wow, the instructors had it out for me. It was everyone's fault but my own. And not only did I think that internally, but I was telling other people that as well. And yeah, even to this day, almost 9 years later, I still think of that and I'm like, God, there is no way I can properly apologize to everybody around there for my behavior then, how I was. And so it's definitely been a motivating factor since then to be like, all right, I can never be that guy again. Some people will give you the nudge and say, like, dude, you were a teenager. Like, dude, it happens. Like, nobody's got their life figured out. Nobody's perfectly mentally there when they're a teen. But, like, I also would argue that, yeah, but most people didn't go to the lengths that I did to try and justify my failure. Yeah, man, just working to rebuild a lot of those bridges. I think I have for the most part, but in some ways you're like, yeah, that's a hard thing to bury, man.
One of the things, so for those obviously that don't know, you're referring to pararescue job, being a PJ on the enlisted side of the Air Force. So you eventually did make it through, right? The course, and obviously you became a PJ. How was that? So you already said like that was so hard. How was that mentally going back through the selection and all that? Because most people, would have just went to another job, but you ended up going back through. How was that mentally on you, or what was that like?
It was absolutely devastating. Because at first you think that was my first, in my opinion, real failure. Because I hadn't been perfect in everything I'd done before. Like, one time I hadn't, you don't pass, you might fail a test in school, or you might not make a team when you're in high school or junior high. But with this event, like, I put everything I had into that. Like, I had started just at the end of my junior year, started running regularly. I was doing my calisthenics regularly. I was at the pool every day, training WaterCon. I had put my heart and soul, made it my whole personality, into preparing for this event. And I didn't get it done. And by the grace of God and the mercy of the instructors, they're like, hey, can you handle a refire? Or washback, as they call it. And I said, yes, absolutely. And then even after that, you have to go back and you have to call your mom and your dad and tell them, like, hey, I failed. I didn't rise to the occasion. I screwed up. Because there's so much leading up to that. Like, you get past, there are these events, and I'd say there's probably 4 or 5 events throughout the entire course where you're like, this is what gets people. If somebody's going to quit, throw in the towel, blow the horn, whatever, it's going to be probably during these 5 events. That's where most of your performance failures, your quitters, and people of that sort usually punch out. And once you get past all those events, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Like, you get past each one, you're like, I can do this. It's going to happen. I'm going to do it. But then no, you get to that point and you have to now tell everyone that you're like, dude, I'm going to do this. Yeah, I didn't do it. Back to day one. Yeah, that was a pretty gut-wrenching thing right there. But at the same time, you also look at it and you go, I just got through a course that at the time had a 90% attrition rate. 9 out of 10 people do not graduate this course. I still have a chance to be the one. And so, I got back in the course. This time I knew my enemy. I knew what was coming. Sometimes they might change up the days a little bit, but for about 95% of the course, I knew what was coming. And so I was ready for that. Mentally, that gives you a whole new confidence. And while I still had plenty of growing up to do, I was able to, I won't say dominate, but I did significantly better than I did my first time. Got to the end, graduated, and then sent me on my merry way to dive school from there. But no, initially, absolutely devastating, but you do there was certainly some growth. That was plenty of maturing, like I said, but certainly that was the first bit of humble pie I think that I'd ever been fed right there, to be like, you can put everything you have into something and sometimes you'll still fall short. But that doesn't mean that's your last opportunity. Like, you still, if you have a chance to go at it again, don't hesitate. I'm sure. I noticed you mentioned on your podcast before with both Can't Hurt Me and what was it? Never Enough? Is that the other David Goggins book? Like, I think he talks about there, like, hey man, just because you failed doesn't mean you've lost your opportunity to try again.
Yeah, man, you're speaking right to my heart there. Yeah, failing's hard, man. And I think a couple of areas I relate to was, putting everything into it, like right when I was going through assessment with y'all and I didn't make it, like I had put the past 3 years of my life into that, not knowing at the time when I started my journey it was going to lead up to that. But when I knew I was capable of trying to cross train to TACPO, I knew those past 3 years had a reason. And so, very similar, I didn't make it. And I still think about it every dang day, man. It's hard. But yeah, for you, obviously you continue on. And then what I want to ask really quick, what was the reason you joined the military? Obviously you said your dad was in, you decided to go, what was the reason for going PJ or any of those, cause that's a big jump, to go straight into one of the toughest and attrition rated jobs in the military. And
actually, to that last point, it's funny when Top T concluded, they give you the thumbs up. You're like, all right, you're happy and whatnot, and then you go sit down with the other bros and you find out who got the thumbs up, who didn't. I was surprised by you. I'll be honest. I was surprised when I found out that you didn't get the thumbs up. Like that, okay, because I didn't see a point where you struggled. I didn't see a point where you weren't stepping up and making things happen. Like you didn't shy away from making decisions. So, shoot, I'm not part of the hiring authority, but I thought you did a tremendous job. But certainly, like if it's still something you're interested in, I would like to see you go back because I think you'd be a very critical member, not just to the TACP community, but to Air Force Special Warfare in general. I think you have the personality that it takes to succeed in that world, having been in it for a little bit of time. But no, I remember one of our teammates. He got the thumbs down. He was also somebody I thought, like, dude, I thought you crushed it. Like, I was surprised by that. And he said, "Congrats, man." And I'm just sitting there joshing, and I see him, and I see the face start to change a little bit. He was getting a little emotional, and it's funny like how in a split second you can turn somebody who's you met a few days ago to all of a sudden it feels like you're looking in a mirror. Like I was you not long ago, relatively speaking, like almost about 8 years ago. But no, I saw myself in that. So that was one of those moments where like, what did I need when that happened? I remember like once it was all said and done, and like, hey, I made the lonely walk back to the schoolhouse to receive my judgment from the commandant and from other instructors, and then it was a lonely walk back to the dorms. I didn't see my buddies because they all went out to celebrate, and it was just me. All you really want in those moments is like a friend, It's just like, hey man, someone talk to me here. Like I'm at a pretty low moment right now. But I saw that, and it's kind of clicked right there. Like, hey, dude, get up, let's get out of here real quick. And so we just stepped out for a little bit. We talked. He let it all out, which I appreciated because that's a pretty awesome moment right there. Is of like, hey man, like one of your bros is struggling there, and you can at least maybe not say all the right things, but you can at least be there, lend an ear, let him know, like, hey dude, like I understand. That's
yeah,
painful.
I think what was really cool about that experience is after we all found out, it wasn't like the day when people failed the IFT, and they were like putting you in a whole room. We hung out like we all made it, which was really cool, man. Like that night, we weren't separated by who made it and who didn't. We slept in the same room together. We took the picture, we hung out. Like that's what I loved about it, man. Like we all just didn't, like, you guys didn't go to your corner, and we didn't go to our corner and sulk. We were just like, it was literally like nothing happened. Like we're getting ready for the next day. And I think that was just that bond we had there, man, where all of us knew we all put it out there. Like, I don't think there were people who didn't make it. They had their ups and downs, but throughout those 5 days, everybody, was putting in, there wasn't just a guy who made it to the end and we're like, dude, how'd you make it, man? Like, you didn't do anything. Like all of us, every one of them, where I was just like, man, and then I look at the guys that made it, dude, and I was just like, spot on, like badass, and then obviously Ben goes back through, he makes it. I think Brandon's going to try to go back through in September. And I don't know, I think that was about it from our class. I don't know if Bryce is going to go back through. I'm not sure. Most of us, like hypothetically, if I were to go back through, I know what I would have to do. And that's why I was glad when Ben and Brandon and them wanted to continue on. But that was the thing that after, man, we were all just right there. We hung out, we ate a bunch of food, we cleaned, and it was like nothing happened, and that crazy night of just changing the schedule and doing all that. But Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah. So what made you want to change jobs, man? Like that's a huge jump for you, right? So a lot of us were wondering too, like, hey, why is a PJ, who that there is an officer-ish job for you guys, but you know, it's not you didn't jump ship because you're still going on the dark side, but you just took a different road.
Mhm. Yeah, so I've actually had that question a significant amount of times, and you get all kinds of different reactions from it as well, which is the fun part. But so tell you the truth, so growing up, like I said, my dad was a fighter pilot, so I mean we hung out. That's the personality we hung out around. But near the end, my dad transitioned over to working as a secondary duty as a rated air liaison officer. This was before TACPOs were really a
All
thing.
right. Yeah.
And so like we got to hang around a bunch of TACPs for I think 3 to 4 years, whatnot. And those guys were awesome. Like before there were like maybe one or two of my dad's buddies that were flyers and whatnot that would actually talk to my brother and I and make us feel like, hey, we're part of the group too. This is fun. But the TACP is like, oh, there was no hesitation. Like, I mean, it was such a bunch of bros, and they'd hang out with us, and a lot of those guys are still my mentors to this day. And so I was pretty convinced, like, I'm gonna be a JTAC when I get older. It's gonna be sick. I'm gonna be like in this community as well. It's gonna be sweet. However, one day, somebody dropped a little nugget, like, hey, have you ever heard of Pararescue? And so I looked into that. And you look at all the advertisements and the brochures for it, and they're like, hey, this compared to the BUDS, the Basic Underwater Demolition and SEAL Training. If you look at the Q course, SFAS selection, or the RASP, which is the Ranger Selection Program, SWIC, Recon Marines, Raiders, all those guys, their attrition rates were high, but Pararescue sat sitting pretty at the top, like I said, at 90%. And I want to see if that I was the one. And so that was pretty appealing right there. I didn't really know much about the job. I just wanted to graduate INDOT. Like that was my only goal at that point. And so after that box was checked, I'm like, all right, now what, kind of thing. And so yeah, at that point, now you go through the rest of the training, you slowly fall in love with the job, and then bam, here we are. Why not go Crow? Well, as much as I tell people mostly that as my reasons evolved, and when it comes to being an officer in special warfare, like all roads lead to the C2 element, which stands for command and control. And so your leadership, you're directing traffic, you're making sure people are where they need to be, you're communicating with people that are supporting you on the ground and in the air. And so, when I think about your three options, which are your TACPOs, your STOs, your special tactic officers, and your CROs, your combat rescue officers, CROs being the PJ equivalent, I have a lot of respect for combat rescue officers, but I think that if I want to maximize my ability to communicate over the radio and around with other supporting units, I should probably get involved with a job that specializes in that kind of communication. And STOs and TACPOs are exceptionally good at that. And then, you look between the two, like, all right, which one am I interested in? Am I interested in being a STO or a TACPO? STOs, while they have an incredibly impressive mission and also get involved in the JTAC program, they mostly focus on airfield seizures, which means that they will go wash and find an area where you can land jets, planes of all sorts, take over that area so that you can get in those cargo jets, so you can get in those fighters and whatnot, refuel, if necessary, help with like Hatter missions and whatnot. And having executed those missions, I wasn't having nearly as much fun as the kind of stuff I do as a PJ. And a lot of the combat controllers I know are significantly more attracted to the JTAC portion than that portion. And so, I mean, if TACPs are already specializing in JTAC and that is all they're about, I'm like, might as well get involved in stuff that people actually like. But the truth is, I mean, like I mentioned before, like that was the career field that I wanted to get involved with when I was younger. And like Pararescue just kind of turned into like, oh shoot, never mind, I want to go do this real quick. But I always knew that I'd come back. And so like that emotional appeal of knowing that, hey, this career field in a way raised me and taught me a lot about myself. And so I was just honoring a commitment that I made when I was much younger. That was most of the driving force.
I think what I love about that is you talk about one of the ways we sort of succeed in things. If you think it right, it's going to happen. What I loved about the way when you were younger, you thought and you knew you wanted to do this. but you didn't like put a time constraint on when you had to get it done, right? Like you could have went straight into TAC B and got it done, but you sort of knew it was going to happen eventually in your life. Like you said, you just went through pararescue and then you came back and now you're there, right? And that's one thing I try to tell a lot of people is just thinking of doing something in life, successful or hard, you're already going to probably do it because you're putting it in the back of your mind where you don't know when it's going to happen, but it'll happen because you're thinking it, you're believing it, and then you're going to do it. A lot of people end up failing because they put a time limit on when they want it to get done. And so, like, let's say, for instance, your time limit when you were younger was, I'm going to enlist and be a TAC B. Well, if you enlisted and you didn't become a TAC B, maybe mentally now you're like, oh, it's never going to happen because that's when I said I was going to do it. You were just like, I'm going to do this eventually in my life. I know it's bound to happen, right? I have this passion. So you sort of let life do its thing, and now you're seeing it, come to forward and a little bit later or a different path, but it's happening. And that's why I love like vision boards or thinking about things. And just it's funny because sometimes you'll tell people like, oh, I want to do this or I want to do that, and they're looking at you like, oh, okay, yeah, like that's a lot, and 20 30 years later when you're doing it all, you always have that one memory of when you thought about when you wanted to do it, and that's what's really cool. What I like you talked about is you thought about it, you believed it, you didn't put a time constraint on it because that's what gets people, but you just let your life go and eventually it was going to happen. And when it did, you sort of stopped and you're like, like that, young man who thought that, like, here you go, like.
I think it's also helpful that I did knowing yourself. I mean, I learned a lot more, obviously, but at the time, what I did know is I wanted to do something that was extremely respectable and that people would, take a step back and go, oh, man, pretty cool. And of course, like pararescue, like statistically speaking, comparably, gets a little bit more kudos, I think, than like some of the others, which that's definitely appealing in itself. Because as when you're a young kid, you want to be somebody. It's like, I'm going to be somebody. I'm going to be somebody worth knowing. But at the same time, I also knew that I would never really had much interest in going to college other than playing college football. Because that was my big motivator at the time. That was my first love, I guess, was football. But I had no idea what I wanted to study, and I also knew that I wasn't anywhere close to being as intelligent in leadership as I needed to be. And so I figured, like, what, I'll learn how to lead while I'm an enlisted guy. I'm going to watch guys who actually know what the heck's going on. They're going to show me the ropes. It's going to be sweet. I'm going to have a heck of a time in the process. And what I thought I was going to learn is nowhere close to what I ended up actually learning. Because at the time, you're like, all right, I'm going to learn how to do this. I'm going to learn how to do that. I'm going to do this. But then, all of a sudden, life hits you and you're like, no, you need to learn this before you get anywhere close to like something. So like I'm certainly grateful to all the leaders that I've had over the course of my career, and hope to apply a lot of those lessons to this next chapter in my life going forward.
I think you'll do great. And one of the key points I saw with your leadership during the assessment week was the day you emphasized, I think we were right outside of the CAC or whatever you want to call it. You sort of lined us all up and you're like, hey, before we start, we got to make sure this is squared away. And I don't know if you remember, but you literally just walk in front of the flight and you're like, hey guys, listen up. Before they come out, we need to make sure this squared away, this squared away, this squared away, and we're ready to go. And then I'm pretty sure I looked at everybody around, I was like, there he is. Like, like you gave it that perspective the first day, and you're like, okay, let's see what's going on. And then when you saw your time, you're like, all right, like I've been through an in-doc, an assessment course, or all these type tech schools. I know what they're expecting now. Let's get out in front of them. Let's not play from behind like we sort of were at the cadre, like waiting for them to attack us. You're like, let's get on the offensive. And that's when I was like, badass. Like, yep, there he is. That was a cool moment.
One of the things that I learned about that course, and I wish I would have had a little bit more forthright with it, because I was deathly trying to hang on to the fact that nobody knew what I had done prior to arriving there. Because not because I was afraid of the increased expectations, because at the same time, like, you want to be that guy. You're at a leadership course there to be evaluated. Here I am, evaluate me, kind of deal. But at the same time, you didn't want any of the evaluators to know what you did, because all of a sudden, worst case scenario, they pull you, kind of thing. Like, they just hold you back. They don't let you offer anything. And it didn't take long for them to figure it out. Because I think over the course of time, you start to get a little bit more tired, and you start to focus less on like, all right, keep this stuff back, because all of a sudden you fall to your lowest level of training, right?
Yeah.
And so at that point, these things start happening, and they'd come over and say like, hey, 1-0, what are you thinking about this situation? And I would answer by using like I'm not too familiar with Call of Duty or what's it called, Medal of Honor, Halo, stuff like that. But I know that you probably wouldn't use the terms that I was using unless you're fairly familiar with tactics. And so I think I slowly started to give myself away with that. And like, how the heck would he know that kind of deal? And, I think by day 2, that's when I was starting to get asked, like, hey, what did you do before you came here? And the worst thing you can do in that situation is lie. And so I just told him the truth. And eventually you see the ohs and the that makes sense kind of deal. And so you're like, crap. And yeah, like that over time, yeah, I started to get plucked more and more, which was frustrating because you want to help your team, but you also don't want to bother the people that are going to determine whether or not you get to continue this ride or not. Yeah, I wasn't perfect in it either. Like there were certain times where I like overstepped and said too much, to where I was really taking away the opportunity to for that individual who's being evaluated to learn and properly execute what they knew. That's something I left there regretting. That's some feedback I got as well. Like, yeah, dude, like, that was an opportunity for somebody to really step up and make things happen, and I took that away from them. That might have been their chance to shine, and I stole that. And so, yeah, I did my rounds at the end to sort of apologize and be like, hey, man, I'm reflecting on the course. I think I did this, and dude, I just want to say I'm sorry for that. Like if that affected you negatively, most the dudes there were obviously too nice, and they're like, dude, no, dude, I appreciated the help and whatnot. I suppose. But yeah, that was good times.
Let's jump into it. So, if you're not familiar with my 4 leadership philosophies, right? Leading by example in all you do. To be selfless, you have to be selfish. Build relationships based off trust and care. Challenge right in front of you by getting comfortable being uncomfortable. Out of those 2, or out of those 4, which one are you pretty good at, and which one do you see in the future that you could probably get some work on, so people out there can sort of learn, if they're struggling that one, how to get better? And then maybe the one that you're good at, how do you sort of like stay humble at it, right? Because sometimes a lot of people do rely on one leadership trait, and they take that one good one and they just like shove it into every leadership position they're in, and they expect it to fit, but it doesn't work out like that. So what are a couple of the ones that stand out to you?
So to tell you the truth, I think between all 4 of leading by example, being selfless, but being selfish as well, building relationships, and challenging my road, I think I can improve literally in all 4. Because when I reflect on each one, I'm like, yeah, no, I can. Yeah. I've had issues even recently where I'm like, I didn't do that, didn't do this, and so it's obviously like leadership is not a like, all right, I've made it to this point. Now I'm set. I'm at this point. Like, no, you are either wavering or you are getting better. Like, you are never staying the same.
Yeah.
And if you're not training that muscle over and over again, it will weaken and you will lose your ability to lead. But I think if I had to pick one that I'm doing that I've gotten better at, I'll say, is the leading by example in all we do. You've mentioned before in plenty of your episodes that the example you use specifically, which I like the most, is how can I tell a guy to get 100 on his PT test if I can't get 100 on my PT test? I'm like, I like that. That's a good example right there. Additionally, I would honestly take the leading by example a little bit further, and if you're both getting hundreds, or that somebody's getting 100, giving them that little jab with your elbow, saying, "Hey, dude, I'm about to do more push-ups than you. Yeah. There's nothing you can do about it." And all of a sudden, now they're all ticked off. Like, you think you beat me? Like, all right, square up, old man. Let's see what you got. Actually, I slightly, you and I kind of had that relationship before Top T, where you had sent a picture of your watch. You'd run, I think, like 8 miles or something like that in some ridiculous time, like less than an hour or something like that. You're like, yeah, dude, I ran this at like 3 a.m. And so, I chose to do that myself. Like, I'm going to run 8 miles. I'm going to beat this time. Now, of course, I did this like in the middle of the day. It was also winter time, so it's probably perfect weather in Florida, like mid 50s. I had eaten a bunch leading up to that. I'd hydrated plenty. I was fully awake. And then I run that. I think I got you by a few seconds, but like when you look at the details leading up to it, like, all right, one guy got out of bed, probably rolled his neck real quick, stretched his hamstrings, and ran this. And you had all day to prepare for this, and you're literally thinking about it the whole time. And so, yeah, I remember I sent you that picture, and I got like, all right, man, hey, I got you. Let's see what you got. And he goes, all right, I'll see you. And then I think you didn't do the 8 mile challenge again, but what you did do, I think you sent like, hey, man, I just went on a 15-mile ruck, and this time. And so, yeah, I had to take the loss there, but no, man, like that's the stuff that you love right there. I think because that's, in my opinion, in leadership, like you're trying to pull that full potential that they have that they don't even know that they have yet because nobody's, I guess, challenged them to that level. Someone might say like, hey, get 100 on your PT test, and they got that 100. Now, like, hey, sweet, I'm there. And you can't really, out of 100 points, you can't get higher than that. What you can do is you can take somebody else who has 100, who's maybe a little bit better than them, and say, hey, try and beat me. Then next thing you know, the whole squadron's getting hundreds, and not only that, but you're all exceeding the standard by a mile. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love it because now that I can say go get 100 because I do it, I challenge airmen usually if they do, obviously try to beat my time, that like next step. Because I used to be, the 100 person where if I were to get 100, I would only hit that number and stop on the PT test, right? If I hit the 6-7 push-ups, I'd stop. But obviously that's not my mindset. Now my mindset has shifted to push a little bit further because then if there's somebody else who's only hitting that 100 and that number, I know they can give more. They're not, they're sort of settling at 100, which is still good to settle at, but if you're settling at 100, there's more you can give. And so now I challenge people whenever I see people, like if I leave the gym, there's somebody taking a PT test, I'll go up to the proctors and be like, hey, tell that person if they beat my time, come find me, I'll buy them lunch and I'll give them my name. Most of the time they're never going to do it because they're like jogging or they're just like not crazy like me. Or if there's an airman in my shop, I'll take it. I'll be like, dude, if you need a pacer, let me know, and I'll come out there and do it with you. And that's just my next level. And that's where I look for other people to do now is not just tell them, but go with them, be next to them to push them further. And I think that's a next good level of lead by example, where you're not showing people in your actions and telling them, but you're also going with them. So I've talked about on someone else brought up another podcast. Mine is bring somebody with you to that level. And when they said that, I was like, dang, that's deep, man. Because so many times we focus on our 100% or our next level. But if you were just to pick somebody up there with you, man, like that was huge. So when he told me that, I was like, so now I look at that a lot when I'm doing things. Like if I'm doing a workout here, I will text somebody and be like, dude, come work out with me. So I can pick them up. Instead of just telling somebody I went and worked out, or I did this, I'm either having somebody come with me or I'm pushing somebody to do that workout as well to push them. So that's like that. I think the next step of leading by example is lead by example, but with somebody. And that's what we did at Top Team, man. Like,
which is interesting because it actually leads right into your build relationships based on trust and care. Because now, trying to pull that extra, you're like, hey, dude, there's more to you than what you have right now, or what you even think. So, like, especially when you said, hey, dude, I'll pace you if you need the help. I'm sure he's grateful for that, and probably sometime down the road there might be something that you're struggling with, and it just so happens that guy excels at. He goes, all right, dude, now it's my turn to help you, and now, dude, sky's the limit at that point.
Yeah, which one? So you said you have to work at all of them, which I think is really cool because, that, and you did mention, which I really liked, there's no middle ground, right? You're either getting better or you're getting worse. A lot of people, and that's why I love the word comfortable, right? A lot of people will either start a journey and they'll hit this point on their journey where they're like, oh, I worked pretty hard. I think I'll just coast here for a little bit and then start up again. But they don't realize, man, when they're coasting, everybody else is moving ahead. So they're technically not coasting on the same level. They're falling back. And so when I tell somebody that, they sort of get offended. They're like, oh, whoa. No, like, I'm still trying. I'm like, you're not. You're technically not trying if you're not trying. You're either moving forward or you're moving back. And that's one thing I love about the First Form community. They always hit people on that, man. Like, and I love it when people remind me of it, when they're like, and it's just like those subtle things where it's like, oh, you ran your 100, and then like you said, I could settle at that 100, but I'm not getting better, what's next? And that's always the thing I love about that what you mentioned is there is no just straight level, because life is always moving. You're either keeping up with it or you're falling back to keep up with it again.
That's one of the interesting things I found about just general progress, and this is actually something that I received from one of my instructors before I graduated the pipeline. Was that he mentioned, like, all right, so you have your berets now. This is not the time to throttle back. And then just simply said it's a lot easier to stay in shape than it is to get back into shape. And so, while if you're working out fairly difficultly and whatnot, and you're really challenging yourself, it is a lot easier to sort of maintain that because you've probably gotten comfortable with that routine after a while. At least you're more comfortable with it than you were before. If you throttle back for even a couple weeks or up to a month, you might find that you'll try to get back into that, and you're like, I'm not feeling it, because now you've gotten used to this time of doing a lot less, and that is now your norm, and so it is a lot more difficult to get back up to that point, as opposed to just like, dude, just stay here, just let this be part of your routine now, within moderation. I wouldn't say like, hey, like before when it was like, hey, from 6 a.m. till 6 p.m. you're working out, like that's ridiculous, but it's like, hey, you're at a high level of fitness, figure out how to maintain this, or at least stay as close to it as you can, because do not fall off this cliff, because you will find yourself off the team, and potentially out of the career field if people start to believe that, dude, this guy's a liability. Like he won't stay in shape and he can't keep up. We don't need him.
That's a hard thing for high achievers or people that grind to maintain, because, like you said, when we grind, our normal is obviously above most, so we think we're comfortable because we perceive ourselves at a higher level, so then we sort of dial back. But what I've seen that's helped me, because I have done some pretty extreme things to where I'm sort of like, like, what's next, right? Or, hey, I just did this, I can coast for a little bit. Man, but I always try to shift my gears in a whole new mindset, right? So if physically I, did 4x4x48, which is really hard, or ran a marathon, or did all this, and I'm like, hey, let's not settle back on that. Let's shift gears to 180, right? Like starting a podcast, which is maybe not physically a challenge, but it's a challenge I'm not used to. So, but I'm still progressing somewhere in my life. Or like, hey, I've started the podcast. Let's shift gears to maybe going back to the fitness stuff, or how do I put them both together? That's where I think some people don't focus on. They just focus on one aspect of continuing the climb, like if it's just fitness. But if you move over to the next block, which maybe it's learning, hey, maybe I should be reading more now. Maybe that's a challenge for me. Or, religion. Religion is always one where, like myself, it's always there, but man, I'm just never really focused on it for like a consistent long time. And that's what I think will help people understand success and hard work. Hard work isn't just physical fitness, or losing weight. There's other aspects of it. Physical fitness is just one that's easy to judge and measure, but it's also one people can see better progress at. Like when you're reading, it's hard to judge. Like, am I really challenging myself? I don't know. But yeah, you bring up a good point of once you hit that norm of an elite level, man, it's tough.
And then the part that I think I need to work on the most that sticks out to me, and is honestly the one that I'm battling at the moment, is to be selfless. You have to be selfish. Sorry. And I can think of a couple examples, probably a few more than that, since Top T alone. Because once you get handed that form saying like, all right, yeah, this is where your future goes, a lot of my focus shifted towards like, all right, now I'm ready for this. I'm going to start preparing myself for this. I'm going to get ready for the schoolhouse. I'm going to get ready to take those next steps. And that's where a lot of my direction was going. Now, the issue with that is when I came back to the 23rd, which is my unit, there was a lot of like, all right, well, you're still kind of a PJ right now, and you're still on this team, and so you still have to do your job as a PJ on this team. But at the same time, there was also this odd pull at the other end where they're like, dude, you're not going to be part of the deployment cycle. You're not coming with us to this place. So why even factor him into the training schedule? Like him being there doesn't affect our unit. And like, that's not like them trying to kick me out. That's more of a like, hey man, like we get you. Like this is where you want to go. We get that. I've had plenty of teammates who, when they assessed for the 724, which is the tier one of our world, that's our SEAL Team 6 or our Delta, if you will. You're pretty much sort of left to your own and like, all right, now go prepare for that because that's obviously priority number one. But there's a lot less time between. Like I'm slotted to go to OTS at the end of October. And we finished top T back in March. And so like, it's kind of been this weird dichotomy of trying to, still be a contributing member of the team by helping out because we still have young guys who are learning the pararescue skills, learning how to incorporate it into special tactics teams that I can help with. But at the same time, I'm still thinking like, no, I've got to be good at being an officer. I've got to be better at understanding how the TACPs do business. And a couple examples of that would be, I will retreat. I won't say retreat, but I'll go off to the base library, and I'll start reading the books off of their recommended reading list, and just like scrimmaging through those. I've gotten through a few of them already. These are just things they encourage. I also read their leadership handbook, and things like that. But in the meantime, while I'm doing that, I'm not at the team room helping dudes create products for the next training thing that we got going on, or I'm not, mentoring the new guys and helping with that. And so, there's a little bit of guilt that you feel when you go off and do this, but you're like, no, it's this. You justify it in your mind, but in the back, you're also thinking like, am I doing the right thing right now? And those are two examples right there where like trying to find the balance and trying to prepare yourself for the future. It's just, I don't know, man. It's tough, and I definitely feel like I drift too far to the left and the right on this, and haven't found a balance yet. But I'll get there.
Yeah, it's a hard balance, and I like that. I like keeping that philosophy because it's so direct, right? Like I'm not trying to make it PG, right? Like somebody was like, hey, you should change up selfless, and put in like, put your gas mask on first, like that saying. But I was like, oh, okay, that way it's not as like direct. But at the same time, I was like, man, I need it to be direct because I need people to know you matter, right? Like you matter first. To be the best for everybody around you, you have to, be the best for yourself. In your case, it's tough because you being the best for yourself technically is helping you down the road and those people you're going to train with. So right now you're in this dilemma on like, man, how do I still be selfless to these people, But like you mentioned, you have a great community where they understand. They're like, hey, well, like, go do your studying, man. If we need you, we'll let you know, but don't feel bad. And I think that's why this top T selection is definitely tough because there is no like quick transition to it, like the TACP guys went back to their community, even though on the enlisted side, so they're getting ready to move. You had to go back to a whole new job where you're still being rated, you're still working, but you have that relationship, with your leadership and your team, which, build relationships, have trust and care. So they trust you to be putting in the work on yourself, but then they also trust you where like, if they were to call you in, to help and support, you would be like, okay, cool. I can do that. That's it. And that's why it's a hard one. That second one is tough.
Yeah, I got my team sergeant at the moment. He's an extremely passionate guy. He was my mentor for the longest time, and he's just an exceptional pararescueman. Definitely been a blessing to have him in my life. But leading up to top T, there was a lot of push and pull because my team commander at the time made comment that, hey man, like if you need to go prepare for this, do your thing. Like we'll be fine. I think he was treating me as if like, hey, you're going to go there, you're going to be successful, which I appreciated because you're like, okay, he believes in me. Yeah. I like this. Let me go full bore into it. And we do the same with guys assessing for the 724, the tier 1 unit. But my team sergeant, he was less about it. He was more of a like, no, dude, you still need to be at all of these training events. Now, fortunately for me, I had just had my daughter at the time, and so the Air Force now allows you 12 weeks of paternity leave. And so I definitely used every last day of that, which rolled almost seamlessly into Top T before that class was canceled, and then we had 2 more months to wait. And so, the 2 months in between, there was a lot of battling there. We're like, hey, we're going to go do this. And so, I went there to do that. And then about 6 weeks out, I said, hey, I'd want to go full bore into training for cop. And he said, like, well, what if you don't get picked? That crushed me to hear him say that, because that kind of made the idea that you don't think you believe that there's a chance that you don't think I can do it. There wasn't even the mention of, hey, what if you twist your ankle, or what if you get sick or something like that and you fail the IFT because you can't perform at your best because you're sick. It was just, no, what if you fail? I took that very, very personally. And that was a big motivator for that 6 weeks. Now, fortunately for me, team commander, he's the boss. And he comes in and says, got your point, understand. Well, you got these 6 weeks, go do your thing. And that was kind of my freedom right there. It was like for 6 weeks, I was able to work with our strength and conditioning coach, work with the physical trainer and the athletic training coach as well. Work with the psych docs to, practice like, all right, why do I believe this? Things like that. And it ultimately paid off in the end. And it was an awesome experience. I still participate in a lot of the tactics training just because there's a chance that there could be tactics involved as well. But yeah, that was another issue there where I was trying to, well, really just being selfish. It's hard to imagine how that was selfless, but, just trying to fight to this is where my future is. And you're trying to be so selfish with your future because you got buddies that say hey man, it's your life. And when you retire from the Air Force is going to put a new guy in your spot like that. But your friendships and your family and whatnot, they're going to kind of hope that you stick around long after you retire. And so you try to be honorable to them. But when it comes to the job, I'll do what is expected. But this is kind of where I'm at the moment. Yeah, I think about how I could have handled that a little bit differently. But it paid off, and I'm kind of hoping it pays off in the future as well.
Pretty sure it will, man. All right, let's talk about a couple of the traits that I listed out for you, or if you got one in your pocket that's not on there, let me know. There's always a few that most people will pick, so I'll throw a couple out if we need to, but which ones did you see you like, that you've seen before, or that are new, that we could chat for a couple more minutes?
Cool. Actually, before we...
you said you had some questions too, huh?
Yeah, there's a few on here that I actually have some questions about. And it was the ones that stick out to me the most are lead from the rear, leave loudly, and suffering comes from overperception of reality. I'd like to start with the leave loudly. Could you elaborate on that one a little bit more?
Yeah, so leave loudly it's a pretty direct phrase, and I read it in a book. It comes more for leaders doing things that they just want other people to know are comfortable to do. So in my instance, I use, hey, when work is done, usually most airmen don't leave until the flight chief or flight commander or somebody leave, right? Well, the flight chief and flight commander should be direct when the duty day is over to go home. And so leave loudly is that expression where if I'm a flight commander or a flight chief and I'm done for the day, I'm not just going to leave because my airmen are probably still going to dilly-dally around and waste time and then go home. I'm going to be like, hey guys, my work day's done. I'm heading out. I hope you guys follow me. Go enjoy the rest of your day. Give your airmen or your team that right and that comfortability that they can leave, and not have to always stay by 5 p.m. or 4. If it's 3 or something like that and you're going to the gym, tell them hey guys, I'm going to the gym, then I'm going home. Do you guys want to go to the gym? Go to the gym. Or if you're done for the day, go home. Check with your flight chief. Make sure there's no duties. I don't care. I'll take anything if anything comes up. So that expression can be used, sort of throughout leadership. Even if it's not leaving loudly, but leading in areas that are uncommon, but being direct about it. For instance, that's why I'm so direct on my physical fitness as a leader, right? Because that's sort of a way to lead loudly is by doing things that people can see you do that aren't affecting your life. They're not affecting your workplace, but you're still getting the job done. So that's what I try to explain by leave loudly right there.
Okay. That makes sense. I agree with that. I had a boss who was like that. He was very much like, hey, once he was done working, which was sometimes like right after 3, on busy days, he would say, all right, I'm out of here. You all have 15 minutes to finish up whatever you have. Then you better be out of this office. Like, okay, fair enough. Now, this was also a guy who showed up to work at like 4 in the morning.
There's usually a
No, he
reason
was
that I
very
leave
much
pretty
like,
early. Like I usually get in around 8. I don't take lunch, right? So I'm working usually all day, and I may do my PT really quick for my lunch break and then go home. And so, yeah, that's the thing. Some people, the perception of leaving loudly is hard too, because they don't understand what you've probably done that day that allows you to leeway to leave early. But you have to be, that's why I love the transparency of being transparent with your airmen or your flight. Because if you let them know, like, hey, you guys, like, and I would be up front, hey, guys, the reason I'm leaving by 3 is, 1, I get here this early. I don't take a lunch break. I do my exercise really quick. I got to go pick up my kids. And then they're like, okay, cool. He's not just saying it to do it, or, he's not just like coming in at 10, taking a 1-hour lunch break and then leaving. Like, like you said, some of the people you saw them put in that work other areas.
Then suffering comes from overperception of reality.
Oh man, I'm trying to think where I heard that one, but I think it's because we think something's gonna be way worse than it actually is. So we're already putting this thought in our mind of how bad it's gonna be. And so it's almost like the fear of thought. But if you actually did it, it's not that bad. And that's just a way a lot of people don't do things, because they're imagining the reality of it is going to be so hard and so difficult and so challenging that they don't even try it. Like, for instance, I won't use fitness, but I'll use like me starting a podcast, right? Like before I thought about starting a podcast, maybe I was like, oh, I don't have the time for it, or I don't know anything about computers. So I'm already suffering based off my assumption of the reality of what's going to happen. But if I just do it, I start it, and then I realize, oh, that wasn't that bad. It's not that difficult to, jump on a podcast or find an app to do it. And so and that's why it sort of ties into that fear of thought. A lot of people don't do things because they fear of what other people think is of them, of doing it. So you're already stopping yourself from doing something that hasn't even happened. And so that's why when we suffer from the reality of thought, we're already constraining ourselves to what we're going to do in our life based off of something that hasn't even happened. Yeah.
And then my last one is, I kind of understand it, but I've never seen it practiced, I suppose, which is lead from the rear.
Yeah, that was the one that got me during Top T towards the end. And I love leading from the rear, and I look at it as, I love rucking, right? So rucking is a big part of like my progression in life. And when I went to the Nijmegen World Ruck March, I led from the rear. And I took it as this way. If I'm leading from the rear, I can see my team in front of me doing what they got to do. I have my guy setting the pace in front. I have my Jody guy right in the middle, like keeping the amp, keeping the fire. I got my stragglers in the back, and then there's me. I can see everything. I know where everybody's at. I can keep the pace, if I need to. I can yell. I can project my voice to tell people what's going on. But then I don't have to lead as much because I know who in my team is doing it up front. So there's 2 ways you can lead from the rear. The easiest is when you become a new leader. You should be leading from the rear, because a lot of new leaders think they need to get out front of their team, start making changes, start implementing stuff to get done without knowing what's going to happen. So I tell a lot of young officers, you should be leading from the rear if you get into a flight. What does that mean? That means you're hanging on to your superintendent or your flight chief, and you're listening to what's going on. You're sitting back and seeing how the flight is operating, day to day. Who are your airmen that are strong? Who are your airmen that are weak? You're taking notes on everybody. You're getting to know everybody. Then after a couple months go by, or a year, or whenever you feel comfortable, then you jump to the front. Then you start making change. Then you start being vocal. Almost, so I don't know if you know it, but you sort of led from the rear during Top T. Those first 2 days where you're sort of like quiet, and then you jumped out and you implemented your leadership. Like, that's where I saw you lead from the front from leading from the rear. Now, for me in Top T, I led from the rear too much. And that was just my comfortability, where I was sitting in back on the rucks, or I was a little bit quieter. I wasn't taking my leadership where I saw those windows. I was letting somebody else do it, because my perception of Top T was they knew who I was. they knew my background, so they didn't need me to lead that much. That I was relying and letting other people who didn't have those leadership experiences lead. And so that's what leading from the rear is for me. It's you're gathering what's going on. Sort of like Ben was a great example of leading from the rear in top T. Like we didn't see Ben really jump out until that ruck, I think, right where he crushed everybody. That was like day 3. And so his feedback was, hey, we didn't know who you were until day 3 because you were sort of in the back in the beginning. And I think he changed that, obviously, probably on his next selection where he made it. He probably knew, dude, I need to get out front early. I need them to know who I am and then pick and choose. So that's where leading from the rear is hard because a lot of people think leaders are in the front, holding the flag, giving the orders, where in reality, you got to pick and choose where you're standing in that rotation.
Yeah, that's I'd mentioned that because I'd talked to Ben just before he'd left, and that was I guess he was already a step ahead of the curve on that one because that was the thing that we talked about. Was like, hey man, I got to know who you are. Like when I combed through the list of the people that got the check mark, they were either element leaders or they were part of the team leader ATL group. Like every single one of those guys at one point filled one of those positions. I remember I'd made a deal with Lee Harper. I think midway through, like, hey man, like I haven't had an element leader or a team sergeant or a team leader role yet, and like, I don't know, man. I really feel like I should have some time there. He goes like, yeah, dude, me too. Like, I mean, I had a little bit in the beginning, but nothing so far. I'm like, all right, dude, here's the deal. If you get picked as the team leader, then hire me as your ATL. And then if I get picked as the team leader, I'll hire you as the ATL. Then sure enough, later that day, he was hired as the team leader. And I said, hey, man. And so then sure enough, he goes like, all right, so we go talk to the current ATL and like, hey, do you mind if Will gets a rep there real quick? I think I held that role for like maybe an hour. And I think 30 minutes of that was spent in a van. But it was an important moment. Like in that time, you at least have the opportunity, which was, I think, that moment where they saw. I think I remember that the moment you were talking about earlier. We're like, hey, task organization, you guys go do this. You guys go do this. You guys go do this. And then the thing I talk about when it comes to like handling those kinds of situations is eventually, there's a bunch of smart guys in the group, right? And they're going to make their comments of, hey man, I think it makes sense to do this. There's a perfect balance between somebody having a very good idea and a bunch of good idea fairies. I don't think we had a group of good idea fairies, but it can quickly cascade and get out of control. And so being able to tell someone that like, hey man, appreciate the feedback. Hold on to that right now. This is what we're going to do because we have very little time and we just need to get this stuff done. So I need you to execute this thing that I've just given you. And once you get that done, come let me know. That way I know that, okay, we're up on that. We can move on to the next task. I can check off on my notebook what still needs to be accomplished. And then once we're, PZ complete, I can turn around, tell the TL, hey man, we are ready to move. And then we can just roll from there. And I do remember there's some instructors being behind me when that happened. I'm like, okay, good. Because, it sucks because you're trying to put yourself in the spotlight. You're like, hey, look at me kind of thing. Because that's sort of counterintuitive, I think, to the personality of the guy we're trying to recruit. Is we want that quiet professional, that guy who gets the work done behind the scenes and doesn't say, hey, everyone look at me. But in those moments where you're being evaluated, like, it very much is like, hey, take those stadium lights and put it on me and only me, because I want all of them to only see what I do. Which it was a tough thing to tell Ben because it was that's a guy he's got such a great heart. He's a very modest guy in my opinion. To tell him like, hey man, go against what you already know and be a look at me guy, right? Because that's the only way they're gonna know who you are. Doesn't matter how awesome you are, because if they don't see it, didn't happen. You could run the fastest time out of anybody. You could ruck faster than anybody. You can be quietly the best leader ever, telling people very silently, like, hey man, do this, or hey man, do that. They love it, and they're inspired by you. If the instructors don't see it, no joy, man. You're not going to get hired. Whether he did or not, I don't know, but it looks like, he's about to join. He got picked up with his last group, so congratulations to him. And I hope to see him down the road.
What are the final parting shots you got? We'll get ready to land this plane here.
I guess I'm curious as to have you ever read the book or at least heard the phrase "leaders eat last"?
Yep. Yeah. I have yet to read the books. I've read Start With Why by, I think it's Simon Sinek. I have not, or no, I think I did read. I don't know. That phrase is tricky on me. Leaders eat last. Because I think the way, oh man. Yeah. So anyways, keep going what you were going to say about it first.
I was hoping to get your feedback on that one because I actually got into an argument with a friend of mine because we were talking about like appropriate leadership traits and all that stuff, and he'd made mention that like, hey man, like leaders eat last. And, that applies obviously outside of just eating food. Like, hey, you don't start taking care of yourself until your team's taken care of, kind of deal. But I said I don't think it needs to go to that extreme. So I just wanted to get like other feedback from other people, like, hey, when you hear that phrase, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, and that's why that phrase I don't like it as much because one of my phrases is to be selfless, you have to be selfish, right? So how can I tell somebody to eat last, but then be selfish in yourself to help others? They're almost contradicting. It's a weird, oh man, I honestly don't like it.
Yeah, I'm not a fan.
Because
it gets so grossly misinterpreted because it's so vague.
Yeah. Leaders eat last. Man. I perceive it as how can I take care of others if I can't take care of myself? I feel like that phrase is telling me to put others in front of me, which I don't know. It's a tough one.
I would have to reread the book
Yeah.
because a lot of the leadership handbooks that I've read so far, both within ST and even the TACP one, all say that, hey, leaders eat last, which means sometimes you don't eat at all. And I thought, if you're the leader and you're the decision maker of the group who needs to be able to critically think in times of stress, it'd probably behoove them to at least have some nutrients in their body to help them think. And so the idea that, like, all right, if I'm a follower and I'm just eating my food and whatnot, and I see my leader not eating because the last guy at the chow hall line hasn't eaten yet, or he's not taking care of himself, like, dude, I would rather see you eat than see half of us eat, because I can turn, like, having done it many times, I can turn my brain off and just hear whatever the team leader says and go, okay, I can do that. Because all I have to do is that task. He has to visualize that, or visualize the situation, come up with an appropriate plan of attack, and then assign those directions and tasks to the individuals on his team. And that takes a lot of brain power. There's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman that sort of explains these two concepts of the system 1 and the system 2 brain, with the system 1 being the quick reaction, like, all right, some stimulus has occurred, now I'm reacting to however you typically react to that. And then your system 2 is the one that takes that information that system 1 has gathered, interprets it really quickly, and then applies, all right, this is how we're going to respond. And if you are not at your optimal levels, then your system 2 is going to fail. Like, it's already defaulting to, sometimes not performing at optimal levels because your system 1 is so powerful. But yeah, shoot, man, like, I look at that. My interpretation, if I were to try and fight for this phrase, would be, all right, I don't know how I would properly reword it, but like, leaders eat last in the sense of like, okay, you just make sure that all of your guys are in a position to where they're taken care of. Like, all right, if it comes to like eating and whatnot, you make sure that every single one of your guys has an MRE in hand, or you make sure all of them are in the chow hall and that there is still plenty of time to eat and that everybody's going to get a plate. Like, once I know everybody is set in that regard, now I can sit down. I'm still going to monitor to make sure that all that is happening, because if it doesn't, I need to be able to react. But I don't have to sit there and wait for each guy to finally put that spoon in their mouth before I can start eating myself. And so, yeah, but it's a shame because when people take it to that extreme of like, nope, I'm not going to do anything until I know all my guys are taken care of. Like, you are screwing your dudes over by making sure that you are not at your peak levels right now, or at least whatever your peak can be at that point.
Yeah, there's a couple phrases that jump out to me during top T, right? It pays to be a winner, So obviously, you have to be working hard to and also legs feed the wolf, right? Like, if I need to be the best I can be, I got to take care of myself. But I like the way you, and I think the way you phrase it is the way it's supposed to be. You know, like, hey, before I do something, let me just check to make sure everybody's, walking the same road. Okay, cool. They're all walking that direction. Cool. Not they're all on the road. They're in step. They're doing this. It's just like you can look up and glance and be like, head count. Everybody's here. Cool. I'm gonna eat. Like it's definitely. You want to jump in and say what's up? This is Will. Will was.
And then I think my favorite of your leadership traits would have to be punish in private and praise in public.
Yeah.
Just because like your dudes, once you get to a certain point, I believe like, hey, what's going on, man? Your dudes have earned that respect to be like, hey, man, if I'm gonna get told off, especially if they're like junior leaders, like let's say you're the team commander, like I'm not too familiar with outside of special warfare, but in the special warfare world, like you have your teams, which are basically like big elements, and then you have your flights. And so a flight is made up of a bunch of teams. And so when I say team leader, team sergeant, that's just below your flight commander and your flight chief. And so, if you're a flight commander and you are about to tell off the team commander or whatever, then you need to make sure that especially that guy is pulled off to the side, because if you go at that dude in front of his dudes, you have diminished his ability to lead, because now they're like, oh shoot, the guy's getting ripped apart. Now, they're probably going to come to some conclusions if you're like, hey man, I need you to come see me in my office right now. Yeah, they're going to go from there. But that is far less impactful than seeing their boss, their leader, get ripped apart for whatever reason. And so, and I don't see why we can't apply that as well to the guys who are at the, your sled dogs, as Jocko Willink calls them, at your lower level. You're like, dude, if somebody's got to get told off, do it privately off to the side, so that, because you're only counseling them. You're not counseling them with an audience. You're just like, hey man, these are the corrections I need to see. This is what I'd like you to do. Get it done. Blah blah blah. And then certainly praise in public, because I think that also inspires people to want to do more for themselves as well. Like, oh shoot, I'd like some of that praise as well. And even if they don't, it's still, they'll feed off that positive energy where they're like, oh, that person's now happy. This guy seems like they're in a good mood. Everybody's having a good time. Now I'm having a good time. I'm in a good mood. Like we talked about, contagious. It's infectious. And you want the positivity to be infectious as opposed to the negativity, because that will destroy a team.
Yeah, no, that's exactly why. Contagious, infectious, we'll tie it right back into there. When you praise in public, everybody else is motivated. I try to do it at least once a day to people I know, even if it's just a high five or a simple text, or if I know an airman's doing something, I'll email their commander, and be like, hey, just so you know, like, this airman went and rucked 18.6 miles this morning with me, and I learned their whole life story, and they're pretty badass, those little things. And criticize in public, criticize in private is so important, because like you mentioned it's going to ruin someone's trust in seconds with the people around them. Just like people say, it takes months to build trust, it takes seconds to lose it. One of the quickest way people will lose trust in somebody is if they see them get in trouble because they know like they did something wrong. Are there times to hang people in public, and criticize them? Maybe, but not as much as you should be praising people in public. And that's where like debriefs come, and that's why I love being a flyer. We're very used to debriefs, in those small groups where the hats come off, there is no rank, but that you have to have that on relationships. You can't have that without relationships. Like when I was a flight commander for AFE, I can't debrief that flight like I could flying in the B1, because I didn't have a relationship with those airmen like I did with my other flyers, where I knew all these people by their call signs and who they were, where I'd be like, dude, you messed up. You need to do this better. Like, that's a debrief. I can't do that in AFE because I don't know those airmen yet. If I would, I'm going to ruin my credibility. I'm going to ruin their credibility. And so that's why it's one of my favorites.
That's like out of all of them, I had to say like, all right, I go with the best. I'm assuming leadership requires humility is just one of those implied traits, because I looked on here for humility, but I mean, it's sort of just like a gimme when it comes to being a leader.
Yeah, like humble, humility. Yeah, just sort of. Yeah, I don't know if I have anything crazy like that. So
I'm finding that balance as well. Yeah, that's pretty much all I got. That's the last edition I have for there.
Perfect. Nice. With that being said, man, we wrapped up a nice almost, what is that, math in public, 15 plus 60, 75 minutes of power talk. I just want to say thanks, Will, for jumping on, man. I know, it's a random time throughout the week, and we've been trying for a while, a few months now, to get on.
Dude. I mean, it was after a while. I'm like, oh shoot, yeah, maybe this is a sign for me. But dude, I mean, you kept after it. You were tenacious. You didn't let me fall to the wayside, kind of thing. Like, kept giving me that reassurance almost weekly. Like, hey man, got this going on. Just please be patient with me. I'm gonna get this done, and then we'll get you on there. Like, I mean, once that situation was explained, like, I mean, you talk about it here as well, transparency. You let me know what was going on,
Yeah.
why time was flying by. I'm like, dude, that's where your priorities need to be, not with some guy who's just trying to talk with you on your podcast. And so I appreciated that, and dude, here we are. We got it done.
Yeah, perfect. Right before the storm. So I just want to say thanks to everybody for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll get Will's info from this. I'll throw it in the show notes as well if you guys want to reach out to him and follow his journey, which is going to be pretty dang amazing. But Will, I'll let you get on with your day. Thank you, my brother. Hold